Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Illinois School District's Records Retention Best Practices and Legal Guidelines webinar. My name is Mandy Kalinskis. I am the marketing coordinator here at Datamation. So we're going to get started, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jim Collins, who is the principal of Datamation Imaging Services.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today and taking time out of their busy days. This presentation I put together is designed to go 30 minutes. And if you're anything like me, your attention kind of starts dropping off after 15 or 20. So I worked really hard trying to compress as much as I could into this time frame. So with that, let's get moving here. Okay. The agenda is basically the challenges of document management retention, what to do with it, and I'm going to show some approaches of how to address it at the end. Very simple. All right. According to the AIM Association, all right, which is the Association for Information and Image Management, there are 6 main concerns that school districts have. All right. And when I run into school districts, they mainly say, hey, I can't find stuff because I have paper all over the place, or I have 400 boxes in a buildings and grounds storage facility. Well, these kind of relate to that. Number 1, lots of paper. The more paper you have, it takes up space. Number 2, you can't find information. With that, if you can't hire somebody, you can't register a student, you're delaying an important process. The 4th thing is changing legal guidelines. You should get FOIA training at least every 2, if not 5 years. And you should have a legal counsel that can provide you information on how long you need to keep your records if you're not sure. The 5th one are compliance and retention concerns. To sum that up, you have to be the steward of your records. You have to keep student records and HR records 60+ years. So you have to keep them accessible, yet you need to keep them secure. And about 1 out of 5 school districts have had a disaster, whether it's a fire alarm, a flood, or something like that. That's also a major concern. All right, here's one of my favorite pictures. I'm not going to say where this is from, but this is kind of a symptom of you go to a district and down in the basement is all these boxes of collecting paper. And you think about it, you could have an admin support person in the business office sitting there paying invoices all day long, and he or she fills up a box of paid invoices, maybe once a month. And then he or she writes on the side of it, here's vendor invoices from March of 2019, and they run it down to the basement and come back upstairs hoping never to have to get that again. Here's another one on shelves. At least the stuff's off the floor. So if there's a flood, a minor flood anyway, nothing's going to happen to it. Lateral files are very common. This is in a school district. These are HR files in a school district west of Chicago. And you think about they're locked up, so that's good, but they also take up a lot of space and they form a corridor. So if you get a request for a personnel file from one of your employees in this case, you have to put the person on hold, go to the file drawer, unlock it, pull it out, and get the file. And there's a 35% chance that that file's gone because it's on one of your coworkers' desk who was talking to that employee earlier in the day. All right, this is one of my favorites. This isn't real. I kind of mocked this up. 2 years ago in 2017, we went up north to pick up around 400 boxes from a school district. We went to their buildings and grounds facility. There were personnel files in there. There were student files in there. There were minutes, accounting, and buildings and grounds, a lot of secure stuff. Well, it was just, we walked through this garage, nobody was there, and there were all the boxes. And right beside them was their lawnmowers and a 12-gallon container of gasoline. These guys weren't the best stewards of their records, but this is real life. We've seen this. Let's change direction a little bit. Let's talk about robust document management practices and specific controls you can put in place to enable these best practices. 3 things you need to do. You have to review your document retention schedules. This should be done by your FOIA officer at least every 2 years. You have to keep up to date on recent legal changes. I'll talk about 3 or 4 legal changes in a couple slides. And you need to implement a retention policy and a solution to that. And that includes identifying the retention of documents and executing the disposition of those documents. And I'll talk about that in the service we provide. How long do I need to keep things? These are the 3 cardinal rules when it comes to best practices. First of all document retention guidelines must be in writing. Secondly, they must be reviewed by your legal counsel and approved by your school board. Number 3, you must get an application approved by the State Records Archive Unit in the Secretary of State's office. So let's talk about these. Okay, I did a white paper, and like Mandy said, it's in the handout section of this webinar. It's about a 6 or 7 page document that I compiled from about 30 applications for destruction for school districts in the state of Illinois. There are 9 record types. There's personnel, board and superintendent, financial, student services, administrative, buildings and grounds, transportation, and the famous other, where you put things you have no idea where they need to go. In this are those 9 record types, but under those 9 record types are 147 different document classes, every one of them with a different retention. Here's a snippet from it. Personnel files. Again, the general rule on main personnel files is you got to keep them 60 years or until the individual is 78 years of age, okay? But if you look at some of the administrative records under that, evaluations, dismissal records, teacher contracts, those are like 5 years and 2 years. So you don't want to intermingle those. Those are administrative records coming under personnel. There was a new, around 2010 or 2012, reduction in force records, which are a child record to the personnel department, part of the administrative record. They reduced the time you had to keep those from 5 years to 2 years. And I'm seeing this trend every year or two where the retention for a lot of this administrative support files is becoming shorter. Board of Ed and superintendent records. This is no surprise. You got to keep your board packets permanently, your minutes, policies, and procedures. But if you look at a lot of the other administrative records that come under the stewardship of the superintendent, you don't have to keep them long, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. There's a new ruling in the Open Meetings Act that you need to keep FOIA training and certificates just 2 years now, because you're supposed to get FOIA training, update training. It's only an afternoon every 2 years. So obviously when you get the new certificate, it kind of supersedes the old one. All right, special education. This is pretty common knowledge. You know, everybody's pretty good about that, knowing that they keep all the files together and the IEPs and the evaluations and everything, and you have a 5-year retention on those. The challenges with this is that people don't get around to it. So they just keep accumulating, and they've got special ed files going back many more than 5 years. The other challenge is they're very voluminous. If you've got a special ed student, I've seen files that can be 3, 4, 5,000 pages long, very voluminous. They take up a lot of space. So we need a tool to manage this more effectively. Buildings and grounds is a burgeoning area for us in document management. I'm seeing in a lot of districts in Northern Illinois, they're maturing. They're putting on additions to their buildings. They're building new schools. So they've got a lot of building documents, a lot of compliance documents, a lot of drawings and plats and things like that. And a lot of these business managers and buildings and grounds people, they are seeing the benefit of having this stuff, a lot of this virtual. So, and it helps them do their jobs a little bit more productively. And there's a lot of diverse document requirements. And look at this, you've got to keep some stuff permanently, yet a lot of things you only need to keep 2, 5, 3, 7 years. So again, that's a lot to manage of different document types under the buildings and grounds. And I'll show you a demonstration of digital images of this momentarily. The third pillar that I talked about is you have to have a state application for destruction. To get that, you need to call Steve Khaleesi. He's a really nice guy. I talk to him regularly, and he's with the Secretary of State's office. I believe his office is out in West Chicago. There's his email address. There's his phone number. Many of you on this presentation probably know him anyway, but he'll get the retention and class of your documents for you and get you started on that if you haven't already. This is a snippet from a 1-year-old application to dispose of records, okay? These are annual budget and appropriation records. This is exactly what it looks like. And the recommendation, the approved recommendation is 7 years. Well, this particular district had stuff going back 66 years to 1953, all right? So obviously, any of this annual budget records they have, they can probably dispose of 90% of it based upon this application that was approved. All right, switching gears a little bit to the compliance and legal aspects of it, tons is being driven by the privacy and compliance laws that schools have to abide by. The challenge is you've got all these records and you got to keep them secure, yet with FOIA, they have to be accessible. 10 years ago, a district in Madison, Wisconsin was found in violation of FOIA when they were deleting emails prematurely that had key student record information on it. I was in a district in 2017 and they had a FOIA request for $16 for 3 reams of paper because their copier ran out of paper one day and they had to pull the invoice because it came under FOIA. Here's some recent guidelines and new rules. I get these from a legal counsel, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But the first one is under recent amendments to the Illinois School Student Records Act. Schools have 10 days to respond to a request for student records from a parent or a student. This used to be 15 days, and I believe the time frame for this was like 2010 or 2012 when they changed this from 15 to 10 days. The second item, the public, in 2018, the Public Access Counselor's Office released a binding opinion that resignations are now releasable under Illinois FOIA. Okay, so these kind of come as a child document that go into the personnel file for an inactive employee. The third is under Illinois FOIA, a public entity denial for a FOIA request must have a specific reference to the exemption as to why they're denying that request. The fourth item here, you cannot deny a homeless student enrollment due to lack of a health record if their lack of health record is due to their homelessness. And this is Every Student Succeeds, which is the new flavor of No Child Left Behind, as well as it's approved and endorsed by the United States Department of Education. Emails. Emails are a whole other animal. They're not treated as emails because there's no single dedicated retention period that applies to electronic messages regardless of how they're sent or received. Emails are governed based upon the content, nature, and purpose of the email. For instance, if you have student file information attached to an email, that email is considered a student file. If there are board minutes and reports on an email, it's considered that. So the email basically falls into the category of its content. The Tressler Law Firm is the firm that I work with when I have legal questions about retention and other things to help out my school districts with legal matters. Todd Schenk on the left and John O'Driscoll on the right are partners there. They're located in the Willis Tower in Chicago, and they also have an office out in Bolingbrook. Their emails there, their phone numbers there, feel free to call them. They gave me the green light to put this information up on the presentation. And I can tell you that any legal thing that I've ever needed, I call either John or one of the people on his staff, and within 24 hours, I get a very thorough legal explanation of how long you need to retain certain documents and why, and what laws it pertains to. So these guys are very, very helpful. How to approach it, all right, the third pillar we're talking about, okay? Let's talk about data acquisition, all right? Data acquisition is a service that Datamation provides. And we've kind of created after 20 years of experimentation to establish a best practice. Now, this isn't something that you have to hire us for. You can do this yourself, and I'll kind of go through the process. And what it does is it organizes your documents, and it helps define how long you need to retain them, and it helps define which ones you can dispose of. So let's talk about that. We have a data acquisition map. All right, the first step is a team of my staff come into your office. We go to where the boxes are when we take them all. All right, we will go to your files and take files out of file cabinets and put them in boxes. We'll take those as well. Okay, they come back to our office, they're received and a barcode value, so a unique ID is attached to those boxes so we know whose they are and when we got them and what they are. And that is important for the chain of custody from a legal standpoint. The second step is I have 3 employees that are trained to do what's called data assessment. This is the key step where every box is opened up and we establish the description of the files, the type of the files, the genre or the year of the files, and a suggested disposition. And let me show you what those dispositions are. So let me give you an example. We find student files in a box from 2005. Well, you need to keep those another, 44 years or so, right? So we're probably going to recommend that you store or you scan those. Let's say you have accounts payable files that are 15 years old. We're going to immediately recommend that you destroy those because the retention on those is 7. If you have another file type that maybe you need to keep 10 years and they're 9.5 years old, we're probably going to suggest, hey, well, let's store them in our warehouse for 6 to 12 months, and then maybe we can destroy them. This is what we give you back. It's essentially a spreadsheet. Again, it doesn't look exactly like this because we break it out by category. And we have the box number, the contents of the box. It's either something we create or it's already on the box, and then the dates. So in the top row, we have special ed files where the date of birth was 01 through 08, but you need to keep these files through 2027 because the last withdrawal in that batch was 2022. We may recommend scanning those. You got special ed withdrawal files from 2002. You don't need to keep those past 2008. We're going to recommend you destroy those, and so on and so forth. It's broken down by category, description, and the disposition. And remember, you can do this yourself. You could use your disposal certificate from the state or our white paper, and you get staff to go through and do this in the summer. And we're happy to come out and kind of give you the highlights of how to go through and do this. All right, let me talk about some imaging applications here. What I'm showing here is a Tyler cloud-based student management system. All right, people use Skyward, Infinite Campus, anything that runs in a window we can work with. And I've got a fictitious student called Jane Schumacher here. Well, we've written an interface where we just click on this button and we can go get the files. And what happens with this is it's integrated right to a cloud-based imaging system. And in this case, I'm on the phone with Jane's father, and he needs the emergency contact information because he's got a new cell phone and he's got a new job. So what happens is it calls the system. I'm running really slow here, I apologize. And it pulls up the list of everything in her file. All right, so I've got, grades, health file, student file. There's that emergency contact. I'm going to double click on that thing and it pulls it up in a couple of seconds. And while I'm on the phone with him, I can simply create an email and send an email to him. And what's going to happen is it's going to take this document and it's going to create a PDF, call my email client, and I can send it to him right while I'm on the phone with him. Okay? So that's a good example of, enhanced productivity and finding something very quickly. And I just wanted to show a couple other examples. If you look at board meetings, okay, we've got board minutes. One of the ways we do with board minutes is we break them down by meeting type. You get a finance meetings, organizational meetings, special meetings, regular meetings. We can break your meetings down this way. And one of the reasons we do this is because you could have a link on your website to look at minutes, but you may want to only have the minutes available to people that are for public consumption. All right. But in this case, since most meetings are typed, I'm looking for a value of 41,191 down there where I'm moving the mouse. This was not indexed by this. This is going to be something that I'm looking in the textual content of the document. So what happened is it found a regular meeting from 1959. So that's 60 years ago that has that value on it. I'm going to open up the image. And these are real minutes from a school district from 1959. So those are 60 years old. All right, and I'm like, now where is that value? So I can go to my full text results, and it says I found that on page 2 and page 1. So let me just scroll down a little here, and there's your 41,191 right there towards the center bottom. And if I go to page 1, there it right is in the body of the document itself. And again, this is just one way to do it. We could also store these things as text searchable PDFs, and you just open up the PDF and do a control find, which is a fine way to do it as well. One other thing I wanted to show is, personnel files. There's a lot of interest in this, and one of the things we do with personnel files is we break files down into different sections. And these are pretty granular, but I'm giving you different examples of application, contact information, direct deposit form. Some districts, they just have onboarding information. They'll have continuing ed. They'll have evaluations. They'll just have different sections. But what the key part of creating these document types and file sections and putting stuff in it is the disposition and the retention needs to be similar. So if you put something into an evaluation section, maybe that has a 10-year retention, or maybe it has a 60-year retention. You want to keep these buckets based upon the retention. We can help you with that. All right. So I'm just looking for a file, and the person's last name is Public. So Steve Public, there's his file. I have his contact information, his HR request, his I-9 form. Everything's in there. I can pull it up in a moment's notice. And again, this is a cloud system, so I could do this from anywhere that I had secure access from. Okay. Last thing I wanted to show, our business office. All right. And in a lot of districts, the buildings and grounds comes under the business office. So let me just kind of show a couple kinds of content here. All right. First thing I wanted to show is here's a water pump. All right. This is a 3-foot by 4-foot or an E-size drawing that was scanned, and it's on the system. Okay. I mean, this could be a building, not necessarily a water pump. And you can blow it up. It's pretty clear. And then I can go right here and hit share, and I can create a link to this document and email it or send it to my architect right then and there, and they can be looking at, drawings of a gymnasium or a school building or whatever. Okay, so that's one way that you can get documents very quickly and effectively to an architect, so they don't have to come over to your office and kind of just go through all these papers and look for stuff in a shed or in a basement or something like that. One of the advantages. Okay, a project plan is another thing that's in the business office under buildings and grounds. Again, these are 10-year health, life, safety reports. All right, you got to keep those. Another example is, I talked about emails before. Here's the same project plan, but I saved it in the content management system as an email. Okay, so this thing has the same retention and same qualities, yet it's a PDF on an email, and there it is. Okay, so in this case, I stored the entire email with the attachment here. So that gives a really good chain of custody, saying, hey, this is a buildings and grounds document that comes under the business office, and I can identify it that way for storage, retrieval, and the retention. Okay. One last thing I'd like to show is EForms are becoming more and more popular. I'm pulling up a paperless insurance application, and this could be something on your inward-facing website where if you have open enrollment in, say, like November of a certain year. Yeah, we have a little issue here. Apologize for that. This could be something that your employees go right into, and they can fill it out electronically. And we use your form, and we scan it in, and then we overlay data elements. And people just go through and they fill out the information. All right, I'm not going to fill it any more than that for time, but they would fill it out. There could be radio buttons on here. I want single coverage, I want family coverage, and you can only fill out one, not both of them. Okay, and so what you're doing here is you're forcing fields that are required. You're forcing the accuracy of fields. You're masking phone numbers and social numbers and different values to look proper. All right, then when you're done, the person can sign it. They can do a wet signature, they can do an e-signature, doesn't matter, either one is supported. And then when they're done, they just hit save. And I'm getting an error here because I didn't fill out a field that was required. But if it did go through, it would have emailed this document straight to the person who filled it out. A copy of this would go in their personnel file in their insurance section, and the data would go right to the IT department to automatically update your computer system so that person's insurance would be updated automatically. So that's just an example of an e-form, and there's a lot of different ones. These are getting really popular. That emergency contact form is a popular one that you can put outward facing on your website. And then when a parent calls in, hey, I'm moving, I need to put my new information in there, you can just say, hey, it's on our website. You can go just fill that out automatically. Where do you go from here? Well, the first thing you need to do is go and count and measure all your linear file footage in the boxes and the file cabinets. We at Datamation, we've got tape measures with our logo on it, so if you want one, I'm happy to give you one. They're actually the #1 most popular thing at trade shows that go from our booth. Call Steve Calisi at the state of Illinois. He's a really nice guy. He's super busy, so he may not get on your schedule for 3 or 4 weeks, but he can get you rolling with this. Number 3, get some scanners. My company is one of the largest scanner resellers in North America. We have desktop scanners that start at $349. And you think about it, that person in Skyward that's paying the bills, instead of putting it in a box and letting the box accumulate, they could simply put the invoice in there, scan it, and they're done. And the paper could go right to shredding. Use EForms. We talked about EForms. That's another way to truncate the paper. Use a scanner and scan it right when you open up the mail. Use an EForm. That will dramatically reduce your long-term paper load. Work on a retention policy. If you have one, great. If not, please use my white paper, call Steve, and it's really not hard to formulate one. And the last thing is Datamation Imaging Services Corporation, or DISC, will do a file analysis at no charge. And what we do is we pretty much will come in and measure and give you a guesstimate on how many files you have and say, all right, you've got 40 boxes of student files and 60 boxes of buildings and ground and so on and so forth. And we'll come in and say, look, based upon that, you've got 400 boxes, but there's only 200 you need to keep. There's around 200 that I think we can dispose of. That's very common. About 40 to 60% of stuff we don't need to keep. And we could take some of your records, maybe some closed employee files and student files and some buildings and grounds. We'll scan them and we'll put them up, a small sample of them, on a website like I just showed you. And you can kind of kick the tires with that. And we call that a test drive. It gives you the ability to use that system to see if it's better. And it gives us the ability to kind of understand your documents and your retention a little bit better. Okay, wrapping things up, this webinar is being recorded. And I know people have issues that come up and can't attend the webinar. We had around 49 people watching this webinar right now. So what we'll do is it takes a couple hours to compile all the data for the webinar to make it a video. Mandy will email this to you guys within the next day or two so that you'll have it. It'll just be a link to something in the GoToWebinar. Make sure you grab that white paper handout. And if not, let us know. We're happy to email it to you. And if you do have any last questions, please, there's no such thing as a bad question. Ask us. Go to the chat section and key the questions in. And one thing I wanted to say in conclusion is that we'll stay on for like 10 or 15 minutes and answer any questions. That really concludes the audio part of the presentation. There's my email. There's our phone number for my company, and I will. That concludes the presentation. And we see got some questions coming. We'll answer those, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.